Imagine working your entire childhood, saving every single penny for your future, only for your own parents to demand it all, just to fund your sister's cosmetic surgeries after her second divorce. What do you even do when that happens? Because let me tell you, what I did next blew our family apart. I'm 18, and growing up in my family felt like living in a twisted, patriarchal fairy tale, but with way more problems than actual patriarchy. All my life, it felt like I was constantly facing the music just for being a boy. Meanwhile, my older sister, Grace, who's 25, got all the love, all the attention, just because she was the eldest daughter. I can't stand her, and honestly, she doesn't even acknowledge my existence. It's always been this way, and I figured it always would be. And you know what? I don't care. Grace is insufferable. There's a reason she doesn't have a single friend. Nobody outside my parents can tolerate her for more than 6 months. Seriously, 6 months is her record for keeping anyone, friend or boyfriend, in her life. And I don't blame them. Frankly, even that is an achievement. What's truly infuriating is she's so clueless, she doesn't even realize she's the problem. Our parents have drilled it into her head that she can do no wrong, that everyone else is just against her, and she has every right to cut off anyone who doesn't treat her like a queen. Newsflash, Grace. The real world doesn't work that way. All this entitlement comes from our parents, who enable her every whim. Some days, my younger sister Kelsey, who's 14, and I honestly wonder if they only ever wanted one child, and we're just decoration. But I thank God for Kelsey. I love her more than anyone in this world, and I desperately want her to escape this toxic mess. Our parents encourage Grace's behavior and try to push Kelsey into being just like her. I cannot let that happen. If Kelsey ends up like Grace, she'll never be able to truly live. She's too young to be turned into a prop, and I will protect her. Luckily, her personality is the complete opposite of Grace's, so she naturally resists becoming the queen of the house. I know it's up to me to shield her from the ridiculous, outdated beliefs that infect our family. From the time I was a little kid, I was constantly told I was the man of the house, that I had to take over my dad's business when I grew up. They hammered it into me. Being a man meant endless responsibilities, being serious all the time, earning money, providing for the family. That's what the men in our family did. I never knew any different. But the push to earn my own money started early. My dad basically said he wouldn't hand me anything on a silver platter. If I wanted financial aid for college, if I wanted any help from him, I had to prove I was worthy. I had to prove my worth as a man. I remember this lecture happening before my 11th birthday. I just asked if I could have friends over for a party. He told me I was transforming into a young man, and it was time to understand the responsibilities of the world and give up childishness. God, I wish I hadn't listened to him then. But I didn't know any better. I picked up my first job when I was 13. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked it. I started walking neighborhood dogs, then dog sitting. I've always loved animals, and starting so young I developed skills, a knack, and most importantly, the patience for it. It wasn't much, but it gave me money. Some I spent, but most, I saved. My parents acted proud, and that made me proud. They never asked what I did with the money, or how much I made. They just made sure I wasn't spending it on dangerous things like alcohol or drugs. They'd check my room religiously. They never found anything because I didn't have those habits. I stashed every dollar, saving it all for college. I was so naive back then. I actually thought that money would be enough. And I was convinced my father wouldn't spend a dime on my education, especially after his whole "prove your worth" speech. The thing about being indoctrinated like that is I never truly felt worthy of my dad's money. I still don't. And this experience? It's the polar opposite of Grace's life. She never struggled like this. The only things ever asked of her were to look pretty and marry well. That's it. It was drilled into her from childhood. I don't remember her ever trying to do well in school or having hobbies that weren't about makeup or clothes. I still remember when I was barely 10, we had to go to my dad's friend's house. Grace had a fever and she wasn't dressed up. My parents were aghast. To them, a normal Grace was worse than a sick Grace. She begged them to let her stay home, but they forced her to go, saying we'd only be there for a while. Maybe she had it bad with them too, in her own way, but it just made her insufferable, not a decent human being. They've tried to put Kelsey through the same thing, but I'm fighting tooth and nail to prevent it. Plus, with Grace's constant drama, they're usually too preoccupied with her to bother us much. Then came a few weeks ago. I never thought it would explode into something so massive. I'm not complaining, because I feel so incredibly vindicated after all these years, but it's weird to have the whole family at each other's throats. It started because I got into one of the best universities in my state with a full scholarship. I was so proud. Mom and Dad were proud too, and my dad actually said he was proud of how hard I'd worked. I rarely hear those words, so they meant a lot.
But what he said next?
It blew my mind. He told me that since I had a scholarship, I could just work to pay for my living costs. I was gutted. Truly. I'd been working since I was 13, hoping that if I showed him I was responsible, he'd finally help me. I wanted my late teens to be enjoyable. I'd spent every other part of my youth slaving away, either at school or working. He just said he'd been training me for the trials of life. Trials? I could have had a comfortable life. I was sullen for a while, but I decided to talk to Dad. I hoped he'd understand. Worst case, he'd scream, but it didn't matter.
I needed rest.
I needed a break.
I needed a life.
I went to him and laid it all out. I'd been working since I was a kid because he'd promised help if I proved my worth. I told him I didn't know how else to prove myself, that I'd tried my absolute best. I was tired of working, and I wanted to actually experience college. I needed his help with living costs. I had a good sum saved, but it wouldn't cover everything. He sighed, looking defeated. He said he understood but couldn't do much right now because Grace was going through a lot. I lost it. Grace is always going through a lot. I yelled. You've always preferred her. You paid for all her expensive clothes and makeup. You funded both her weddings out of your own pocket. And for what? So she could get dumped by her husband's because she's an idiotic ass with no personality beyond being a stupid Barbie doll. Dad looked exasperated. He said there was nothing he could do but help her because she was in a very bad place. This bad place was Grace having 2 divorces by 25. Her first husband was my dad's friend's son, Luke. They married when she was 20, he was 28, and he was done with her within a year. I was young. Thankfully, kept out of the details. All I knew was Dad and his friend were still fine, but Dad was kind of pissed at Grace. She married again 2 years ago, to this guy nobody liked, Andy. He just gave everyone the absolute ick. I don't know what she saw in him besides his money, because he was genuinely loathed. He was weird, disgusting, so much so that even my parents didn't like him, which was a miracle because they liked anyone with money. Naturally, things went south in that marriage too. Andy was a serial cheater. He knew he could get away with it because Grace was obsessed with the money and luxury, so he knew how to shut her up. Mom and Dad tried to get her to leave him, but she refused, saying she couldn't bear another failed marriage. She'd make it work, no matter what. What it took was another woman he knocked up, and then he left Grace for good. She came home a year ago. It's been hell. For me, especially for Kelsey. Now that my parents' Grace project has failed, and she didn't do what they wanted, they've started eyeing Kelsey. They've tried to manipulate her, but I've done my job well. I've trained Kelsey not to fall for their tactics. Grace, for her part, is miserable. And, honestly, I don't feel bad for her. I know being twice divorced by 25 is a lot, but I can't. I never liked her, and I don't think I ever will. So, Dad told me his focus was Grace. Again. He said I needed to be understanding. I wanted to scream, but it felt pointless. Then he said something that made all that simmering rage inside me burst to the surface. He told me that since I knew how bad things were for Grace, and because I had a full scholarship and was practically sorted, he wanted me to give all the money I had earned to him. For Grace. And for what, exactly? For cosmetic surgeries. Because she believed her husband's left her because she wasn't pretty enough. I have never heard a more ridiculous proposition in my entire life. I have never felt so much pure, unadulterated anger. I would have slapped my father that day. I don't know how I didn't. I started screaming. I don't remember exactly what I said, but it wasn't sweet. It wasn't nice. It was nasty. I verbally spewed bile. I couldn't believe his audacity. I told him he had ruined my entire childhood with his stupid notions, and that's why he'd failed both Grace and me. I told him Grace was an unemployable piece of crap because they never let her develop any personality or hobbies beyond being beautiful and finding a husband. That's why they felt guilty now, and why they'd pander to her every whim. It was the only way they could feel less guilty. I told him there was no way in hell he was touching even a penny of my money, especially not for Grace's glow-ups. He was surprisingly calm. He said he understood my frustration, but it was time to stand by my family and do the right thing. I shot back that I'd been led by example, and if he had never done right by me, how could he expect me to do the right thing? I'd only ever seen favoritism and partiality. If he expected me to just let that go, he was dreaming. I called him a fool for expecting me to help Grace, just as I was a fool for expecting him to help me. Then I stormed out, totally broken. I broke down. I was so frustrated. Logically, I knew if I took a job, I'd survive college. But to hell with logic. I was just broken. I think the fact that no matter what I did, no matter what I achieved or how I behaved, I was never going to be worthy enough for my family finally hit home. There were 2 children in that house. One was a young woman who never did well in school, married twice, divorced twice. She never lifted a finger, never wanted for anything. And the one thing my parents asked of her, stay married, she couldn't even do that. Then there was me. I don't remember the last time I was stress-free or truly happy. I was always either studying, working, or looking for work. More than the money, it was about proving to my parents, especially my dad, that I was a good kid, that I was doing what they wanted, so maybe, just maybe, they'd love me in return. But it never happened. And now I knew it never would. Grace was their favorite, and nothing on earth could change that. So, I knew I had to do something, and fast, to save both myself and Kelsey. I didn't know who to turn to. My uncles would sympathize but couldn't change Dad's mind, and it would just backfire on me. The only people my dad actually listened to were my grandparents. I knew they were the only ones who could put an end to this crap. By this point, I didn't even want Dad's money. I'd accepted I'd have to fund college myself.
Now,
I was out for blood. I wanted the world to know what really happened behind those closed doors. I wanted to show them who my father really was. Little did I know, one call to my grandfather would change everything. If I'd known the kind of influence he had over Dad, I would have called him years ago to end this nightmare. I called Grandpa and told him everything. I didn't leave out a single detail. Not the part about working only to prove myself to them. Apparently, my parents had told everyone I worked because I wanted to, and they'd tried to stop me. I told him about the scholarship, Dad's refusal to help with living costs, and finally, about Grace's planned cosmetic surgeries and Dad wanting me to fund it. It was a long, hard call. Grandpa sounded like he was trying to process it all. He told me to calm down and said he wanted to meet in person. I agreed. We met at his place the next day. He lives an hour away. I repeated everything. He didn't interrupt, didn't say much. When I finished, he just asked what I wanted. I said I wasn't sure, but I was sick of the bias, the neglect. He told me not to worry, that he would take care of everything. That was last week. Nothing happened immediately. Dad kept pressuring me for my money, and now Mom was in on it, emotionally blackmailing me. But I refused to relent. I knew Grandpa was going to show up. I knew he was going to blast Dad to Kingdom Come. I trusted him. But God, I just couldn't wait for it to happen. I needed my vengeance. I needed my justice. Update 1. Guys, the blow-up happened. And it was much worse, or rather, better, than I ever expected. I honestly never thought it would circle back like this, but hey, I am absolutely not complaining. My grandparents arrived and called a family meeting. Dad probably thought it was just one of those regular lunches before we all went our merry ways.
boy, was he wrong.
It started with Grandpa asking Dad what his plans were for Grace. Mom mumbled something, but Dad confidently said she wanted to enroll in college, and they were contemplating what was best for her. Everyone knew it was a lie, but Grandpa wasn't playing games. He turned to Grace directly and asked what courses and colleges she was looking at. She just stared blankly, speechless. The whole room went quiet with embarrassment. Dad's face turned completely red. Then Grandpa looked at me and asked about my college plans. I told him about the full scholarship, but mentioned I had no help for living costs. He looked at Dad, made a face, and Dad pretended not to see it. That's when Grandma stepped in. She asked Dad how much he was going to give me, not if he was going to give me money, but only how much. Dad stammered that we hadn't discussed it yet. And that's when I spoke up. Actually, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, we did discuss it, and he completely refused to help me out. Grace kicked me under the table. I didn't care. This was all coming out. Dad started laughing nervously, calling it silly banter between father and son. My mother was glaring at me. If looks could kill, I'd be 6 feet under right now, being eaten by insects. I retorted that it certainly didn't feel like banter to me, and that I'd even been asked to give up all my savings to fund Grace's cosmetic procedures. Bam! Grandpa slammed his hand on the table. Is this true? He demanded of Dad. I think Dad was too stunned to lie. He just mumbled, yes. The entire room went silent. Grandpa, bless his dramatic heart, gave a long, lingering look to every single person there. It was pure theater, and it worked beautifully. He asked Dad why he was behaving that way. Dad had no answer. He turned to Mom, asking how she could be okay with such blatant partiality. She had nothing to say either. Then Grandpa stood up. He announced that since the parents were choosing to stay quiet, he had no choice but to take matters into his own hands. He revealed he had set aside a $300,000 inheritance for the three of us, which he had intended to divide equally. But, he said, since my parents were focusing all their energy and money on Grace and none on Kelsey or me, he was forced to rethink this division. He said that Grace would get a mere $30,000, and the remaining $270,000? It would be divided equally between Kelsey and me. My jaw dropped. $135,000. That's insane money. I never asked for this. I never told my grandpa I wanted more money. So, I don't know why he made that decision, but when he said it, all hell broke loose. Grace started screaming, yelling that she never knew there was so much money, that it was unfair she was getting peanuts, while Kelsey and I were getting so much. Grandpa looked her dead in the eye. All your life, he said, you've been getting so much, and Kelsey and he were getting peanuts. You didn't protest then. Dad tried to chime in, saying this wasn't fair, that Grandpa was discriminating. But Grandma promptly cut him off. We're not discriminating, she said, her voice sharp. We're just being fair. You two started the discrimination. We're just trying to make things right for the two other children you treated like crap. She added that none of this would have happened if they had been good parents. Dad argued there was no need to punish Grace for a crime she didn't commit, that she should have her full share. Grandpa, by then, was truly wild. He was still somewhat civil, but Dad's constant defending and lack of apology finally pushed him over the edge. Actually, Grandpa said, his voice dangerously low, you're right. Poor old Grace isn't to blame. I saw Grace breathe a sigh of relief beside me. The real culprits, he continued, looking squarely at Mom and Dad, are the two of you. He then declared that the inheritance for Dad was now also going to go to Kelsey and me. All the color drained from Dad's face. He hadn't thought that through. You can't do that, he whispered. Grandpa just said, watch me. It was a dead-ass power move. Honestly, that man has my respect. He said he had nothing more to say, and that they would be leaving. He then warned Dad not to hound either Kelsey or me, because we weren't to blame. He had done what he thought was right, and if Dad tried to manipulate or harass us, Grandpa said he could go a lot lower. I think Dad is genuinely terrified. He hasn't said a single word to us since Grandpa left. Kelsey is a kid. She doesn't fully grasp the magnitude of what just happened, but I know Dad is petrified that Grandpa will follow through. Mama's tried to talk to me, but I just avoid her, just like I've done my whole childhood. Now I'm suddenly the hot thing of the family, and everyone is sucking up to me, even Grace. I told her to piss off. She was the last person I wanted to talk to. I'm just so glad Grandpa cut them off. They're finally going to face the consequences of their actions. As for me, that's a lot of money. I know I'm going to be set for life with that kind of head start. I don't have to worry about college, and I don't have to worry about after college either. Update 2. This is just a small update. I've left for college. Leaving home was bittersweet. Kelsey hugged me and cried, and I cried too. I know it's going to be incredibly difficult for her there. I know my parents will try to manipulate her. I've told her to tell me everything that happens, and she promised she would. I can only hope I can do enough to save her, to prevent her from being brainwashed by the idiots I have to call my parents. Grandpa said I could use part of my inheritance for living costs, and I'm so grateful. I told him I'd probably still take a job, though. For me, it wasn't really about the money in the end. It was about the lack of acceptance, the neglect I faced from my parents. All that rage, it was that. He said he respected my decision, and that I was much more of a man than his own son. But he also told me he wanted me to enjoy life, because responsibilities and duties would always keep on burdening me. So we reached an agreement. I'll try working, and if it strains me or doesn't work out, I won't hesitate to reach for that inheritance. It's mine by right. I thanked him, and we both cried a little. I don't think I'll actually need to use the inheritance. I don't even mind working. It just feels nice to have someone support me, to have someone to bank on financially, but more than that, psychologically. I guess I've missed this feeling my entire life, and it's all very overwhelming right now. So, tell me, after hearing all this, what would you have done in my place when your parents tried to steal your future? Have you ever had to stand up to your family like this? I really want to know what you guys think in the comments below.